Okay, we are talking about running and what kind of strength is needed before you go out on a run. So, running is a single-sided dynamic movement, all right? We don't necessarily think about it that way, but we're placing each foot down. There's a lot of impact, and each side of our body is taking on that impact with each step. So it's really important that we are actually working from the bottom up to make sure that we have the right stability. So first it's in your arches, right? Making sure that we're not dropping, collapsing into the arch, or trying to maybe overcompensate and rolling to the outside of the foot, right? So strong arches, very important. Then as we move up the leg, we start talking about the ankle and the knee. Because what'll happen is if you don't have the right amount of strength in your quads, in your inner thighs, the knees will start to collapse. So if you've ever done any band work, picture that with me, the mini band, pulling those knees apart to keep the knees tracking towards those second and third toes and keeping the knee and ankle nice and parallel, right? So that when you take one step, your knee's not collapsing in. As we come up, hips, 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 so important, right? We need to make sure as we step, we're not losing these nice level hips, right? That nothing is dropping or swaying as we run in that forward motion. Okay, so we need to do a lot of hip strengthening and little hip tests to see how this is going. The hips are connected to the pelvic floor, which is then the transfer of energy to the upper body. And we need to make sure that we're being kind to our pelvic floor and not creating impact that's overwhelming for the body, right? We want the pelvic floor to work naturally. We don't want to have to overthink it. And we don't want to cause additional problems if we aren't strengthening properly. Okay. Then when we talk about posture, we're using all the good posture cues that we've worked on together. It's super important that we're not relaxed as we run. We're not hunched over, tucked under, none of this, right? We need proud chest as we run. Nice and tall, keeping the ribs stacked over the hips, maintaining the proper pressure control so that we can find that endurance. And if we lose it, if we do find that we have leaking during the run, snapping out of that, pulling those shoulders back, getting that nice stacking, and just correcting your posture may actually eliminate the leaking that's going on. So please keep that in mind. Okay, so first thing I want you to do is stand on one foot. I want you to do this on both legs, but we're gonna raise up to our toes and down. Even on all of our toes. So this is testing arch strength. It is so hard to do. Not holding on to anything, because if you're running, you're not holding on to anything, right? So we're gonna test that on both sides. Should be able to do 30 on each leg without resting. That's a serious challenge. Okay, then we're gonna do a little hip hikes. Okay, so I want you to raise each hip and then come back to neutral. Engage the glute of the standing leg. We're not using our back. We're just using our hips, these little hikes, to test our hip strength. What's happening down here? Does the knee want to collapse or wiggle all over the place, or are you able to maintain that stability? Okay, so now that we've got that glute engaged, we can hike the hip a little bit. Our foot's not touching the ground, right? I can hike it up so it's just barely off the ground. And we squeeze back to try to get into the side of the glute medius. Good. Wrapping around those hips. Now, the final test is going to be a single leg squat. So I'd suggest maybe putting a chair behind you so that you can really if you need, fall back on that. But we're gonna do our little hip hike and we're gonna bend into a single leg squat. So just like you would with 2 legs, right? We don't need to do anything fancy. We don't need to stick our leg out. We're just doing that little hip hike, squeezing the standing glute and bending, hinging forward, maintaining that neutral spine, the ribs stacked over the hips, and trying to keep that parallel hip, knee, ankle, right? Straight down as we go. All right, that's the big one at the end. We're gonna make it dynamic. We're gonna move on. Got some stretches and other circuits for you. So keep watching, but go ahead and go through those tests for me first.